It's kind of surprising that I haven't already discussed this car in GT7, with of course it being both a day one vehicle and also a pretty important one given how intrinsic the Nissan Z has been in Gran Turismo's past, especially in its modern form. Of course, the modern Z, the 350Z, was first introduced in GT3 as a concept car. That's probably still my personal favourite version of it, only featured in that game, as far as I can recall. It might have been in a concept or something, but like I said, as far as I can remember at least. Of course, there are some exceedingly popular racing versions, like the ZLM race car, inspired by the old super wide-body 300ZX race car. Then, of course, we moved forward in time to the 370Z, which I've also reviewed in real life, as well as in the game, in Beards and Cars. Great bit of kit, and at least here in the UK, quite affordable too, on the used market, and a very, very popular car. And of course, as we move forward through time, it was only a matter of time before it comes up to the, if you will, 400Z era, even though, of course, it's not actually called that. This one, the Fair Lady Z in 2023 spec, a day one vehicle, if I recall correctly, in GT7. The Z Performance in particular is a car that I have featured on the channel but never actually reviewed. Of course, I did a Nismo version, special project I think it was, way back, and it's a great platform to work with, but we need to actually talk about it from that review perspective. And also for this particular review, I've decided to modify it very heavily for two reasons. One, to see what it can do, and secondly, to potentially either save you some money by not, for example, motor swapping it, or to see if it is worth dropping the extra few $100,000 in modifications to put, in this case, a GTR Nismo engine in. Now, for me personally, I really like the design of this car. I've never been a huge Z aficionado. I like the classic, it's an iconic car, and that's probably part of the reason why I like this one, because this very clearly takes those direct cues, in particular with that front grille, from the old school Fair Lady Z, and I think that is a great thing to do, because it's such an iconic car, it's such an iconic shape, and when you especially take away the bumpers, the chrome, etc., the rubber that they used to have back in the day, this really was the basic grille, that big gaping rectangle shape that was left underneath. You never really got the chance to see that angle though, because it was, as I said, covered with a bumper. This gives it almost a throwback vibe, as well as looking like a functioning concept car. And to me, I always love it when a production vehicle ends up looking like a concept. It's why things like the Lexus LC500 look so good. And for me, it's why the Dodge Challenger will always be one of the coolest concepts to production cases, because it looks so similar. Virtually identical, in fact, in that initial SRT8 form to the concept car. This still looks like a concept car, but on the street, and I think that's awesome. In fact, in terms of living up to its lineage, I might actually prefer what this car has done over what the new Supra did. To me, the Supra feels, if anything, a little bit underwhelming compared to the legacy of the A80, you know, overblown or not. This, though, is more of a logical next step in where this lineage came from. And of course, this has the advantage of it being much more recent. 370Z to this Z is much closer in time, which it's an unfair comparison, but still. And in terms of performance fully tuned with that GTR engine, of course, you're well over 1,000 horses, and you can see here the pace is definitely not lacking. One of the great things that's carried over as well, though, is how forgiving the car is. Even, sure, with racing hard tyres, many cars would be a challenge to drive, but this one, very, very clearly, at least if GT7 is a cue to go by, and I would imagine it probably is, because of course we've compared it to real life before, and they do a pretty good job most of the time, it definitely takes cues from what Nissan learned with the R35. The GTR, having such a long run, of course benefited other models in the performance range because they learned so much from that car. The R35 back in 2007 already redefined what an affordable performance car could do on the budget of a 911, but with a performance which could rival pretty much anything around a track. Over time, though, they made it even quicker, with not a huge jump in power in most cases, and yet it was consistently better, faster, tighter through corners, better around the track again and again and again, to the point where it got a little bit long in the tooth, but you can clearly feel that that was an inspiration here and that a lot of that tech was carried over. In fact, again, for my money, it almost looks like the GTR was a visual inspiration for this car as well, because it has way more sharper, squarer angles, a much more flame-surfaced, almost BMW kind of shape to it, whereas, of course, the 350Z, 370Z both had much more of a curvy image. The 370 a little bit more aggressive, but still definitely a much curvier machine. Now in the case of this one's standard specs, you're looking at just under 70 grand. It sits at 540 or so points, just over, which is pretty reasonable, especially given that it does have a hair under 400 horsepower and weighs 1,543 kilos. It is turbo aspirated, of course front engine rear-wheel drive, and if you fully build it, like I said, you're looking at over 1,000 horses, but even the standard engine, thanks to it being turbo aspirated in particular, is not bad at all when it comes to performance. If you look back, for example, to that Nismo build that I did, it was not a slow car by any stretch. So if you were already a fan of the 350Z, especially I would say the 370Z even more so, well, chances are A, you've already driven it anyway because it was a day one vehicle, but also I don't really see how you could be disappointed by this one. It has a great combination of old and new, that fusion of R35 inspiration, both in terms of tech and certainly in terms of its design with that chunky square appearance, but also a clear throwback, arguably in more of a sense than the 350 or the 370 ever were, to the origins of the Fair Lady, and to me, even as a non-Fair Lady aficionado, that's really cool to see. So I'd imagine for fans, it's probably pretty great. So that's it for my thoughts on the latest iteration of the Z in the game. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Is this a car that you use quite a lot? I do have some future plans for the Z as far as special projects, so we'll see when those happen. But for now, that's it for my thoughts. I'll see you next time with another review, and of course, thanks for watching.